Hello, welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, we love seeing you live every Thursday night in Facebook land, YouTube land. The chats are always lit, and remember, your chats can show up on the air, so, mind your P's and Q's. Pints and quarts, right? Let's see. You know me. My name is John Rurock. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957, and that's my introduction. So let's head over to Joe for his introduction. Hey, Joe.
Hello.
Hello, Joe. What do you know?
Joe. I am Joe. Joe Martinez. Still the worshipful master of Manasseh Lodge, number 182. Hopefully, I get to stop saying that in December. And damn glad to be here again.
Nice. Awesome.
Damn glad. Super glad.
Next up, Robert Johnson. How's it going, Robert?
It is bussin'.
Bussin'.
I only said that because you said
no cap.
No, it's bussin', no cap.
Nice.
So yeah, past master Waukegan 78 in Waukegan, Illinois. Current sitting secretary at Space Novum 1183 in Libertyville, Illinois, and also the editor in chief at the Lyceum, the Illinois Grand Lodge publication exclusively for education. And our June issue just came out, so if you want to check that out, you can pick it up on the Grand Lodge website or on the Illinois Lodge of Research website for free. Enjoy.
Are there gun raffles in the Lyceum?
No, it's strictly education, so we have nothing Grand Lodge related.
Barbecues.
Nothing.
Dare I say a bean that is of a
green bean
color?
cook-off? Yes.
No, I can't.
Hey, everybody. Jason Richards here, past master Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 and Lafayette Lodge number 79. Sorry to interrupt everybody else.
We were busy.
I know. You forgot about me. I'm sad.
I want to know more about this exciting thing where there's something doled out to the Masons that has no extra superfluous garbage in it. Tell me more.
Yes.
We'll talk about that in a whole new episode.
All of Masonry is wrapped up in excess superfluous.
Yeah, we've got to talk about something odorless and colorless, and it's called carbon monoxide.
Nice. Let's do it.
No, it's not. But hey, why not?
Why not? All right. Before we get into tonight's show, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons who support the show. You guys rock our socks. And so if you want to support the show for many, many years to come, patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable. And that keeps Jason's hair from not looking unstylish.
It keeps my hair from not looking like John's or Joe's.
Yeah.
Like that.
Fair.
It's like a progression, right? Like we're going there, young, exuberant, there, 73 kids, here, gave up on life. Like it's just like a progression.
Perks of only having one.
If Masonry is like the 3 stages of life, we're like the 4 stages of life. Just line us up.
I'm old.
Old Joe over there.
Dotage.
Moving along to Tarot Card of the Week. So, we are on the topic of the element of air. And so we've randomly selected a very important air-related tarot card. Jason, what have you got?
All right, so I have my Sugar Skull tarot deck with me today, and
Are there skulls in Masonry?
yes. Okay. And so what we have today is, let's get the focus right. That wasn't the one I was planning to show, but we'll go with it. The 3 of Swords.
Ooh.
There we go. Here's the one I was planning to show. The Ace of Swords.
You can do either.
Yeah. You can do both. If you're
Yeah,
interested in the little cartoon nudity, we can do the 2 of Swords.
I say we talk about both. It was divine providence that you totally messed up, right? Like maybe people really need to see the 3 of Swords, and Providence was like, Jason, not today, buddy. Right? So who needs to hear about the upright 3 of swords? Emotional pain, emotional damage. That's what it is.
Emotional damage.
That's that. That's what that card is.
People are hurting. All right. Love for you. Lots of people hurting.
So the swords being one of the suits of air. And so we have new beginnings, new intellectual endeavors, new studies maybe for an Ace of Swords. And then 2 of Swords will get you to the intellectual choices you need to make. But again, the universe was telling Jason to pull that 3 of Swords, which is pretty much in every deck a very, very naughty, very bad card.
Well, it's not a naughty card per se, but I mean, it is one of the cards. I think, is it the 10 of Swords as well?
10 of Swords, stabbed in the back. Face
the
down.
10 of Swords, 3 of Swords, the Tower. Like, there are some cards that are a bit more depressing than others. And then most cards, when you reverse them, are like, oh, that's not great.
Yeah, but there's like a pretty good spin on a lot of those reversals. I mean, like the reverse 3 of Swords is like even a little bit better.
Yeah, it's like recovery. You're bouncing back from the bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. And what was kind of cool, actually, thinking about the Ace of Swords, and then last week we had the Ace of Cups, being for water. I was thinking we used a couple of similar words describing both of those cards. Just being because they're aces, right? Like one, the Ace of Cups is creativity, but also in that same vein, your Ace of Cups your Ace of Swords tends to talk about things like intuition and things. So they really work together.
That is true.
Yeah, awesome. And I like the fact that the aces in all of the suits really focus on like divine manifestation. Like you never see people necessarily in the ace card. It is always the suit by itself or a disembodied hand, grasping the wand. Take that as you will. So it's interesting because I think it just kind of it's a mini creation story in every single ace card.
Bussin'. I like it. Very cool. So we'll learn a lot more about the sword suit, the element of air, and everything else that has to go with it in this episode of the Masonic Roundtable. So let's dive right into it. Now on our multi-part series of the classical elements, we are on the air. What do we say about, what does Sun card say? The Ace of Swords is about drawing boundaries in the sand and holding strong to those boundaries. Aha. Yeah, bring the sword out. Get ready for defense. Very cool. I like it. All right, so let's do what we do the past couple times. Let's do a little bit of history of where these things came from, how they were used in religious context, and we'll get into some philosophy and end it off with some really weird stuff. So, Joe, take it away.
All right. What are we talking about?
Air.
Let's do air. All right. Air. So, we're going to start back in history, as we always do. And let's start with ancient Egypt. So, don't see too much of your Sumerian, Akkadian. Don't see a lot of stuff in those texts talking about the concept of air as an element. But we do pick up the conversation in Egypt. Egypt had a deity that represented air. That was the goddess Shu and her brother husband Tefnut. And they had babies, and they were Geb and Nut, who were the heavens and the earth, that weren't allowed to do incest love. So Osiris separated them. I'm sorry, Ra separated them, never to touch again. And that's why you see a lot of those hieroglyphs with a female form over a male form. That's separation of the heavens and the earth. But Shu was the manifestation of air. And it represented the space and the air between the earth, where the god people lived, and then the cosmos part, the heavens, where the big dogs live, the primordial deities. So we start in Egypt, and then we go, as we always do, from Egypt we go to the land of Greece. That's where everything starts to pick up. And in Greek philosophy, especially in pre-Socratic thought, air, as we know, we're talking about it, was one of the four primary elements along with the other three. And we start to get into a conversation in Miletus, where we've heard some other super awesome Greek philosophers and mathematicians they came from. But it was Anaximenes, who was one of the three major philosophers in Miletus, who basically proposed that everything, all the matter and everything that came to be, came from air. Now, he did get a lot of disagreements and discourse and arguments about it, but he was the first one to propose that. And then I'll touch very gently on Aristotle, since I know John's going to give you a whole Aristotelian lesson on it. But Aristotle also maintained that idea about air and the qualities that it has. When we bring up those diagrams talking about it being wet and hot, representing things like your life and your soul. So that was ancient Greece. Now we're going to let's move more east, and let's go into Hindu philosophy. So air, or Vayu as it's called, is one of the 5 primordial elements there. So there in Hindu culture, they have 5, not 4. But it wasn't just air, it was wind or breath. And we'll get to that when we get to the ancient Hebrews. But it was associated with life and what living beings had that made them different from other types of things that were out in the universe, right? Because they had living breath. It was also considered a deity, Vayu, who was the god of the wind, and he was the spiritual father of lots of the other gods in the Hindu pantheon. Let's go a bit more east, and let's go into China. So you've got Qi, right? That is that concept of energy or life force, and that's often associated with air in a lot of ancient manuscripts, and it reflects things like the invisible and the intangible and the qualities that are associated with what we associate with air today. And it really is an underlying principle in ancient and even modern day traditional Chinese medicine and things like martial arts. So now let's go all the way to the other side of the world, which we often overlook, right? We usually ascribe a lot of these awesome things to Western Europe and Asia and India and things, but we do forget about the indigenous Americans that have lived there and had civilizations there for just as long as everybody else did, right? But many Native American tribes, they personified or anthropomorphized their elements, and air was absolutely one of them, as a spirit or a being. So people like the Lakota people had gods associated with the air, and they were one of the 4 primordial deities, right? Going back to those 4 elements. So air was associated with things like wisdom and life and communication and accessing the divine. And then finally, we'll touch on the ancient Hebrews again, who air was a really important part, as we see in John's last name. So yeah, but we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, all good things. Air, history, boom. That's you. But you're on mute.
That's me, yes. Awesome. Yeah, so that was a whirlwind tour of centuries, millennia, and miles around the globe. But again, as always, I love seeing the patterns and similarities that happen across those. Again, I'd still argue that is an indicator of something like intelligent design. While we have we've either had communication across all of these cultures in the past, right, to have similar archetypes implanted in our mythologies, or it's just in our nature, and so that there is some sort of intelligent design or creation to that. But that's just John's theory. That is not a Masonic opinion.
That's a Masonic opinion.
Sure.
Intelligent design is definitely a Masonic opinion.
It's a dogmatic assumption. One of the very few ones in Masonry.
Yeah.
What Jason said. Awesome. Okay. So, what are your guys' takes on some of the other aspects of where air falls into like these cultural religious contexts? Jason, Robert.
So, air to me, I think ultimately of the Noah story. And I know we're going to touch on
Go for it.
alchemy later, but the air indicates kind of that distillation and that purification process that is, now complete or mostly completed. And so you have the earth and the material sense driven world that is then swept into the solution, which is the second stage of alchemy. And then from there, separation occurs. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but separation being the third stage of alchemy and one associated with air. I misspoke on that last week because I'd mentioned water was a big part of that. But through the processes then of conjunction and dissolution, you are taking the impurities out, adding pure things in, and then the air piece, the distillation piece, then kind of heralds the end of the purification process, which is again, necessary for you must have air in order to abstract away the solution and leave you just with the pure elements.
I like it. Again, I'll build off of what we talked about. So there's a reason why we've done them in the order that we've done them in, right? Because you're now moving up into a higher state of consciousness, a higher plane, or the next level of either integration or reaching your deity. But we're moving from the earthling material beyond the emotional, and now we're getting into this more intellectual side of contemplation, as it were. So I like that, and so it definitely applies in not just operative alchemy, but spiritual alchemy as well.
Well, I think that just to drive that point home about how we're doing them in order, they show up in order in a lot of things where we would not normally find them, right? So I know both weeks in a row we've touched on the creation myth or mythos of man being created, right? And you started with dust, then you had water, and then the next one was, if we're quoting Genesis 2, it's breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. God did that with no other creature, not with the bees, not with the aardvarks, the dinosaurs, the megalodons. I just went to the movie, saw a trailer from Meg 2, and it's all I'm thinking about right now because that movie's so stupid, but I have to watch it. Yeah, we're gonna watch that. But
God French kissed man into existence.
That's right. Purposefully.
The first CPR.
Yes.
Damn.
Is it mouth-to-mouth suscitation as opposed to resuscitation?
It's just the first. It's the sus.
Sus.
Yeah.
It was totally sus.
It's totally sus.
We're just dropping all the Gen Z slang. So.
Oh yeah, Gen Z Bible stories. Check that off on TikTok.
Yes.
So
oh my gosh, those are hilarious.
So it's interesting. We're talking about air tonight, right? Like,
yeah,
almost. Maybe we should have talked about. I don't. Maybe planning on our part or whatever, but the idea of fire would have been perhaps a next logical step from water to fire, and then we could talk about air, right? But only because it's a transformative process. So we'll touch on this next week, big time. But this idea of fire being perhaps what leads into the air element, right? Because it takes what we might call our burnt remains, or the things that are given off, the gases, flight into the next phase of existence, which would necessarily be air, if we're talking about scientific process. And what's really interesting too is, our states of matter. There are 4 states of matter as well that really echo these our 4 elements, right? So we've got your solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. So again, we've got another correlation between kind of ancient teachings of man and, what the scientific theories have given us today in ways to understand these things. I also think interesting about the concept of air in a philosophical or even a spiritual sense is, what's the name of the book? Something fire, the spiritual fire, alchemical fire. I can't remember, but Max Heindel talks about it in one of his books, and maybe he ripped it off from Steiner. But there's this idea that it's like this divine holy fire that's always burning, and it's this unseeable element, and it has a relation to air in a way. But what's interesting about it is that this air fills all the gaps in all the knowable and in all the unknowable spaces, right? If you read H.P. Lovecraft's the Book of the Dead about Cthulhu and things, he's got some interesting things in there about the creatures that live in the spaces in between. So these interdimensional spaces, right? And the idea in some of these intellectual sort of wisdom teaching texts about the concept of air in some of these spiritual ways is that the air fills like all the voids to secure the dimension that we live in. So there's all of these wild things that are out there as well when you move through not just our major religions, but when we look at cultural and small religions like various I don't want to just say like voodoo or hoodoo or anything like that, but you see a lot of that stuff in a lot of those regional element things.
You're spot on. You see that, and it's very culturally related, right? Like you talk about voodoo, Santeria, which is just a mix of Catholicism and that it's got absolute connotations to what we're talking about. And so regional dialects of spiritual interpretation, they all pull, going back to John's favorite thing, they're all related. All related.
It's aliens.
Hey, and you know what? While we're talking about something kind of interesting and niche, you ever heard of something called breatharians? So if you look it up, there's this.
Is that thing. Like Brethren?
Yeah, exactly. Your DDGMs love it. It's basically this crazy. I say crazy, but there's a number of people out there who are probably practitioners of this. But it's essentially that you breathe in the prana. You go up on like high hills, and you can take the sunshine. And you just breathe, and you don't have to eat anymore.
Oh yes. Yeah,
oh, the sun eaters. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Benjamin
breatharians.
Air baths. Mm-hmm.
It's wild stuff. Interesting. I don't buy it, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I need a little soap in my bath, not just air.
I can't do the photosynthesis thing as I am not a plant.
Yes. Plant people.
Speaking of ancient Egypt and plant people.
You were back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You were plant people.
That's true.
Yep.
That's back when the pineal gland was like ginormous.
Ginormous.
Right. So one thing I like about the element of air here is the pattern here about intellectualism, right? We're moving up. We're talking.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Let me try tweaking again. I was
there. You go.
Slipping earlier. Okay, there we go. What I like about this is the concept of the mind, right? We're in the intellectual phase now. We moved beyond the emotional stage of water, and we're now in the intellectual side. We're trying to use logic and reason to understand abstract concepts. So we are moving out of scientifically, because I know that's what Robert and I like to do. Is our jam is to find the marriage between the mystic and the scientific. We're moving out of the marriage of the reptilian brain or the limbic brain, and now we're moving into the evolved like neocortex, right?
Well, even with starting with Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Earth is your basest, animalist
primal
instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so you step up from that into emotion, And then now we're hitting actual logic.
Right. Yeah. So again,
And reasoning.
and I love how it marries up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You're like, I need shelter, I need to mate, I need food. And then after that, now I can start thinking about like, what do I want to do with my life? And like,
now
a
I can have
job.
an existential crisis.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. You have to work your way up to an existential crisis, right?
Yeah.
So but that's where we are, and that's this next phase. Another thing to think about if you're thinking of these four elements in this order as some sort of like ascensional ladder, that you don't remain in any one of these at any time. So there are times where you are, you're off on a camping trip and like everything's great, and you now have time to yourself where you can now think bigger thoughts. And then there's times where you got to go back to work on Monday and just get right down to the material world again, and everywhere in between. So so that's where we are now with the concept of air. Again, tarot has it as swords, as the symbol of air. The usual explanation is as swords cut through air, you can hear the sword slice through the air.
Whoosh.
Whoosh, swing. Also, there's if you think about the mind as the instrument of this intellectual thing, right? Then it's also your spirit, your consciousness. It is your it's where the seven liberal arts and sciences come from, right? Because we're now applying our intellectualism in a way that helps make us a better person, right? We're not quite spiritual yet, but we are making sense of the world in a logical sense. And so that marries well with the Fellowcraft degree, where we have logic and reason as the instrumental part of the middle journey that we all have in our midlife.
It marriages perfectly, I think, with what you're talking about, John, when you're looking at connecting air element with the fraternity in an attempt to strive and ascend to spirituality.
Got to do the work.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put you guys on the spot. If you had to assign a classical element to each of the 3 Blue Lodge degrees, what would you assign?
Fellowcraft.
For air.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's where I was going with that. How about EA and MM?
I was going to let RJ go first so I could agree with him.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time thinking about these two concepts, and maybe y'all can work through it with me. But for the listeners out there too, what do you guys think? I mean, there's the idea of initiation, and initiation brings a profound, major change. So maybe that's fire.
I agree.
But then what about the 3rd degree, this culmination? Yeah. Like, I want to say that's fire because it's so intense.
But it's got more than one. I think the earth element factors very heavily into the Master Mason degree.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
You know what?
So maybe I have a false limitation here, but I like the thought process.
Yeah.
I think that makes general sense. I mean, if you're looking at it from an initiation standpoint, you've got a transformation of fire element for the 1st degree, very intense, something that's totally going to be world changing. And then we've got a 2nd degree where we are, trying to ascend through the idea of air, bringing us to spirituality, and then a grounding factor with the element of earth as it ties into the degree, right? When we talk about from it we came, so to it shall we return.
Well,
there's a fire element that precedes that grounding element, though.
Correct.
You have the manifestation in the near completion of the temple, followed by the grounding element. It almost goes backwards in a way.
I like it.
I kind of see more of the earth element in the Master Mason's degree, not for the obvious connotations, right, of
Right.
a burial, but just that us having a constant reminder that these meat suits that we travel in are so transitory. You know what I mean? You're not going to use this forever. Some get to use it far longer than others, but it's going to go back to dust, you know.
Well, that's like your opinion, man.
What is that from? That's like your opinion, man.
Big Lebowski.
That's right.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Come on, man. He's the sage. Sage.
The sage.
But I do know, while we're on the same train of thought, some of our favorite peoples that we love to talk about make great use of air. In their
Hot
stuff.
air?
We're talking about Freemasonry. No, I'm not talking about hot air in Freemasonry, although there's a lot of that.
After
TikTok,
chilly night.
TikTok abounds. Love TikTok. Yeah, so I was thinking of, you know, things that play into Freemasonry and things that Freemasonry sourced its stuff from, like Rosicrucianism or Gnosticism. You know, when you hear the word pneuma in Gnostic texts and in Rosicrucian manifestos and things, they're very targeted about it's not just talking about the air molecules that we breathe. They're talking about breath and spirit and
the
life
spirit
force,
of God.
like that. Yeah,
Like
so,
the Tool song.
All things unseen.
yeah.
Nice.
Maybe air. If air is the one thing that, like, if you measure out every element that is unseen in the universe, and air is mostly that thing, it's just hydrogen.
Ooh.
Well, air is usually unseen except when you have wildfires in Canada.
That's
Then
true.
you see a lot of it.
Yeah, thanks, Canada.
Oof.
Canada.
That was rough.
When I was in New York, they kept calling it the Canadian barbecue.
Huh.
All my Uber drivers.
Nice. Let's talk about platonic solids.
Yay!
All
the
right,
rainbow.
baby.
Rainbow. It's like Skittles. They
Very
should make
crunchy
Skittles
Skittles.
in these shapes. Yeah, that'd be dope.
What do you got here, Robert?
The platonic
Oh,
solids,
look
baby.
at his little hiding
Oh,
place.
man.
Mine are upstairs.
What? No way. All right, let's talk about platonic solids. Now we're at air. Bouncing around, which has 8 faces, 6 points, 12 edges. Air is blunt, subtle, and mobile, and therefore is equated with the octahedron in the
Platonism.
Platonic system. Right, exactly. So there you go. And I, which is interesting to find out that, at least in the Virginia Royal Arch thing, we don't really talk much about platonic solids, but I know in other Royal Arch systems they actually have that as a system. So,
Yep.
Lame. So I didn't get to see those as part
Super
of that.
lame. Yeah, there's a fantastic book. I think I just mentioned it on Facebook a week or two ago.
Yes, it's the Journey of the Royal Arch.
No, it's it's called In Search of That Which Was Lost.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, they used to sell it just on what's that British Freemason bookstore? Lewis Masonic.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
it used
Lewis
to only be on
Masonic.
there, but now it's on Amazon. But yeah, fantastic book, and it gets into the elemental symbolism in the Royal Arch degree that they use there. Super fascinating stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we also have the four humors again, which have been disproven, but they were interesting for many centuries.
Is this where we talk about phlegm and crap again and
Yeah,
stuff?
we're out
Damn
of
it.
phlegm,
Good.
and we're out of black bile, and so now we're
Yay!
over in
No more
the
black
blood, because blood is both hot and wet, right? So it combines a masculine and a feminine aspect, but air is associated with blood, which you could think about blood as essential to the spirit of your body, right? Your soul. You need blood to live. So,
Is this why the sword is air?
ooh, interesting. That's
Because
good.
it draws the blood.
It draws the blood.
Blood.
So that's the humors. Then moving on to the levels of the system of the Jewish soul. They had 5 levels. We talked about a couple of different ones, and now we're on to Neshama, which relates to the higher soul, where people think and they meditate on God and reach an intellectual understanding of the world and their spirituality. Right. So again, when I read that description, it made a lot of sense that is the intellectual part of basically the midrash. Like when you're trying to look at the interpretations, the Talmudic interpretations of the different various verses. Right. So now we are deconstructing. We are applying logic. We're applying reason to understand our faith better. And so I think that's an interesting correlation with this next higher level of the soul called Neshama, to analyze the underlying principles abstracted from the categories of thought impressed upon them by the human mind and the human experience. It seeks to pierce through the essential rather than the ephemeral. One of the signs that a person is on this level of consciousness is that when the mind is clearly focused on an appropriate divine concept, all of the senses become temporarily nullified. You're in the zone, as they say.
Yeah, I really like this idea, mostly because you see this with people who have, for centuries, whether in popular culture through the early 20th century, even the late 19th century, these spiritual gurus who have largely pretended to be in this phase of existence, kind of in these different esoteric wisdom schools, you might call them. They pretend to be in this state where they can see things in this sort of way that is described here in Neshama, where they say that the last bit, divine concept, all the senses become nullified, in that you can look at this thing and you can pull out all of your subjective opinions and take away what everybody else is saying about it, and you have a sort of prima materia focus or look at whatever the concept might be. You'll talk to people who have gurus who say, my master doesn't see the world like we do. They see it in like totally different ways, right? And in that same way, you might think spiritually. You could also look at somebody like Turing, somebody, these great mathematicians who saw the world in numbers. But think about, instead of numbers, think about spiritual concepts and the nature of reality.
I don't even see the code anymore. All I see is blonde, brunette, redhead.
Oh man, that was
Steak.
That was great.
Yeah.
That was a deep, not a deep cut, but it was a good one.
Yeah,
I like it.
It's time for a rewatch.
No cap. No cap.
All right. Word.
I don't want to remember anything. Just put me back in.
Maybe like an actor. Okay, here we go. Let's move on to the Zodiac signs. So the Zodiac signs, we have air signs as well. Air signs, they enliven the intellect and enhance sociability. Those born under its influence are highly sensitive and often swamped by their feelings. No, wait, I'm mixing around. That's water. They are bright, curious, versatile, and intellectually restless, always collecting information, trying out ideas, and connecting people. They revel in conversation and are supremely social. The air signs are Gemini, Libra, and me, Aquarius. So I'm definitely an air sign there. Over intellectual.
Were you really born under those signs?
My sun sign is an Aquarius, yes.
Okay. Because like traditionally, those Babylonian dates shifted, my man.
Yes.
I was actually born under the Libra, even though I'm a Scorpio according to Babylonian dates.
Exactly.
But when you were reading that, you know what name just immediately popped into my head?
What jumped in your head?
Frodero.
Interesting.
Right? That dude connects everybody. And
he's probably an Aquarius.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm a look.
So the let's see. The also air signs are communicative, intellectual, sociable, and fueled by ideas and social interaction. Right? And that's why we talk about like the age of Aquarius, for example, like that we are supposedly in. And with communication and thought and intellectualism.
Well, I thought we were on the butt end of it, and that's why everything's kind of going to hell in a handbasket.
No, we're in the beginning stages.
The beginnings, we're in the flux period.
The liminal stages.
Yes. Sorry.
But it makes perfect sense to me if you want to apply that age of Aquarius thing of why AI has just exploded since Thanksgiving, right? Because that is certainly communication and code and just intellectualism all just kind of bundled into one. So we're at this tipping point right now, and it just makes sense that it's happening in 2023. So I like it. It makes sense to me. And I have a lot of Geminis in the house too, so makes sense. Moving on, let's go into the Part S system, where we talked about the 4 levels of exegesis, reading biblical text. Now the D in Part S is darash, which is translated to inquire or seek. And so this is again a comparative midrashic meaning, as given through similar occurrences. You're looking for interpretation and comparison. It's like boom, like you're again trying to make sense of this intellectually. You're trying to find hyperlinks within the text. You're trying to compare, and you're thinking at it from an intellectual level, not a spiritual level, not from an allegorical level, not from an emotional level. You're actually just trying to piece this together, right? So it's funny to watch people who really dive deep into, say, that the Talmud and all these other biblical commentaries, and they're picking things apart, and that's my jam. Like I love comparing how these things tie together, what they reference in other parts of the Bible or biblical texts or even apocryphal texts, right? And how all these things fit together. But it is certainly not a inspired way. It is much more of a logical, scholastic kind of way.
But that way also does require that you place the text in context.
Bingo.
Which is what 99. No, I'm sorry. Let me be polite. 95% of people don't do. Right. Is place the context into the time when it was written, right? Because that really plays a huge role into your intellectualizing of it. So, boom.
That's very, very true.
Thinking about the opening and closing of a Masonic lodge, there are some words that are spoken, which, I mean, I'm not going to say them because I don't know, like if they're considered wonky in different jurisdictions, but when we're talking about air, there's the whole concept about the word as well. That sound is essentially it's a pressure wave, right? So
it's a vibration.
Yeah, that moves air. So there's something there too.
And you need air for sound. You need sound for the word.
And John the Evangelist would agree with you. He loved vibrations in air. Mm-hmm. Yes, lots of them.
Pythagoras too.
Ooh, my favorite people.
Ooh, nice, awesome. All right, so that's all I got as far as covering the spectrum of related topics from the past. Again, we could wax poetic on that too, but I do want to now kind of look at the big question, right? Which is before we dive into the final question of what does it mean to you? Does anyone else have anything to add to their research on the element of air as it relates to this episode? Did we miss anything? Or did we cover the bases? Good.
I'm excited personally about next week because we get to manifestation, and it, kind of completes the 4-step process of going from intellectualism to ultimately you could see it as divine godhood and the ability to create and manifest your will.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be fun. The culmination of all this effort. Before we get into the fifth element.
Colors.
Well, we gotta have a fifth element. Yeah.
Colors, white and yellow, which are going to be corresponding to air as well.
True. That is true. I didn't cover colors in the previous episodes, but depending on your source, red would be the color of earth, because that's what Adam or Adam means.
Vermilion.
You have the color blue for water, obviously, and then air is white. Sorry, where are we? It's color.
I love watching John
Yeah,
look
checking my
things up
notes
in
here.
real time. Yeah.
I'm not looking it up. I'm just checking my notes, but I had different notes for that. So anyway, now, final question time. What does the element of air, given all this context, what does it mean to you personally? How do you apply this element of air practically, rather than through the lens of history? So I'm going to go with Mr. Richards first, and get his hot take. What say you, Jason?
So the application of air, I think, is incredibly important, because that starts to separate us from the rest of creation. And so we go again from earth, which is just your basest animal desires, up to emotions. Now instead of just acting, you are reacting. But then when you get up to air, that is when you begin to see human logic and intuition and those activities that separate mankind and put mankind closer to the plane of the divine than the rest of creation. And so applying, I think, the principles of intuition and reasoning and study in your life is critically important. And I think, to bring it back to a real world example, like there are a lot of things that we just either post, especially in social media, that is just a rote reaction, very emotional, or something that just appeals to kind of our basest nature. But being able to study, act in respectful manners, and employ the first three liberal arts and sciences, I think is becoming much more of a lost art. And so being able to take a step back and act with reasoning and logic is something that I think we can all very much benefit from.
Awesome, thank you. I enjoy it. I think I would agree. I see some head nods from Joe. So take it away, Joe. What does the element of air mean to you?
That was a great answer by Jason. Don't want to take anything away from it. Absolutely. I think that for me, in my daily life, I associate the element of air with that process of spiritual transformation, right? And it's the vehicle by which that occurs. I love everything you were talking about at the beginning with, the element of air starts to tap into our intellectual parts of ourselves. And I think that's very true. And I think that using that element of air to focus on wisdom and knowledge and the intellectual understanding of all the super weird stuff that we talk about, you do have that filter of air to intellectualize it and make it a part of your daily physical growth, whether it's through contemplative activities or breathing exercises, to center both your mind and your spirit. I think it's absolutely essential. So for me, it's definitely a thing to keep in mind. Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet. All right. Over to you, Robert.
So for air, I think for me, in a practical sense for today, I really think about it as representing a lot of what the tarot gives us: intellect, with a particular focus on communication, uh, listening and hearing and processing, having some mental clarity about things before we speak about them. Um, Also, the idea of mindful use of our our logic, and our intuition. Um, I would also say spiritually really does represent something I think that we talked about earlier in the fellowcraft degree is the transitional period. Um, Particularly, I like to think that everybody lives to 100 years old, but I'm 41, so I'm probably over the hill realistically. And in the last downhill of my life, um, there's plenty of time left, and it's not like it's around the corner or anything. Maybe, I don't know, but at 41, you start to think about the later time in life. You often see in some spiritual texts, we'll see things like air being associated with women in the latter half of their life through things like menopause and things of that nature. So for a man, it's really no different. It's like there's an element of transition, preparing for transition, if you will, as you uh, I don't know, contemplate your own mortality in your last 20, 30, 40 years maybe. That's
I
it.
like it. Makes sense. Makes sense to me because that's certainly where I am. As for me, this is my jam. So I tend to live mostly in this element of air. I over intellectualize, I over analyze. I'm an engineer by training, right? And so I tend to default to overthinking, over applying logic, which there's a downside to that too, which is you could be cold, right? You could, and I've honestly, I've had feedback from peers and people that I used to supervise that says, sometimes I don't know what John's thinking because he's just he's in his head too much, and I've taken that to heart, right? That I can overthink things, overanalyze, but there's a time and place for it, and so I'm working on appreciating the finer points of the emotional side, right? The spiritual side, right? The disciplined side of the other elements. So what the tarot card that resonates with me the most is the King of Swords. That's kind of aspirational of where I'd hope to be well grounded in my intellectual endeavors, but I'm not there yet. I think we're all a work in progress. That's why we are Freemasons in general. But that's where I tend to resonate. So it means a lot to me in the sense of logic and intellect is cool, but don't overdo it. Like make sure you balance it with everything else, because that's the real goal, is to balance all these things together and make sure that they work together, and not just one of these stands out, right? You want to have a four-legged stool, not a one-legged stool. That's my goal. So with that, hey, I want to thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you next week, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.